Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to TFM&A. My name is Steve Kemish. I'm Managing Director of an organisation called Cyance, and I chair the Institute of Direct Marketing's Digital Marketing Council. I'm also the worst Beyonce impersonator you're ever going to see today with this thing on, but bear with me. Thank you for coming along. What I wanted to talk about is B2B marketing and the reality that the traditional approach to business marketing is dead. However, if we embrace a multi-channel environment, perhaps there's a world forward for us. Firstly, all good presentations and some bad ones have graphs in to try and make a point. This is picked on email and open rate trends. I could probably put dozens and dozens of different graphs in here to make this point, which is something I'm sure we're all aware of. Regardless of whether we use email or any other channel to business marketing, the rates of response, in this case open, are on the decline and have been on the decline for a number of years, whether we use traditional on or offline. And we have a challenge in as much as the way that we used to do things, perhaps single message blast to the masses, is not working in the way it was. Why is that happening? Wow. Why is that happening? Sorry, I wasn't expecting that slide. Why is that happening? Well, I think an awful lot of it is self-reflection, and as much as the way that we've done things for too long in business-to-business marketing has been a tad dreary. We should perhaps hang our heads. This is a Google search that I conducted last week when I was writing these slides that simply says business to business. Now, I'm assuming most, if not all of you, work in business-to-business by nature of sitting here. And you'll, of course, be familiar with that kind of artwork to describe the industries that we all work in. Nothing says business-to-business than people like this. And it begs the question in terms of when, apart from the fact that's the most complicated handshake and no one's ever done a deal like that in the history of mankind, let alone in somewhere like the UN, it makes an interesting point for me in as much as the challenge is that perhaps we've just been a bit lazy with our marketing. This isn't really who we are. Those people are not real, they're actors, and they're just people that are there deemed to interpret what we do. And what it misses, I think, is the point that we're all human beings, and the opportunity with business to business in whatever industry we're in is to try and talk to people on a much more one-to-one and a more familiar and relevant way than perhaps something like this. Couple that with the other challenge that I think we've seen, which is this single channel approach is just literally not working. So the blast and hope of whatever the great big gun of marketing we've got is not there. We're all really time poor individuals. A lot of the products and services I'm sure you represent are very complex and indeed expensive. They're not the kind of thing that you'd expect one email or one telephone call or one DM to drop through your letterbox and you'd make a purchasing decision on. It needs much more of a considered sale and approach to try and get somebody's engagement. So just simply hoping that one blast is going to get us there is a very, very old-fashioned way of looking at things. The last of these poor analogies is the idea that just simply by building, particularly with the web, that we can build this thing and they will come. If anyone's familiar with the film Field of Dreams, that concept. It's strictly just not true in terms of we cannot be lazy enough to assume that by building sub-infrastructure, whether it's a website, whether it's some kind of social page or social group or forum, the rest will happen for us. It's going to take hard work. Again, it's a very saturated world that we live in. We're all bombarded constantly by lots of messages. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have some kind of smart device in your pocket to pick up emails and purge on the go. There are lots of different places where you stand a challenge, and the cut through from marketing is harder and harder. We can't just assume that people will find our presence on the web. Google does a very good job and other search engines do a great job at trying to index you, but if you don't try and work hard with those organizations and sites, you don't stand the chance. People won't necessarily read it, people won't necessarily share it or comment on it. Just because there is a social web out there doesn't mean people will engage without us having to stand back and say, okay, what are the basic pillars that we need to understand if we're going to approach our marketing or perhaps reapproach our marketing? What is it we're doing if we feel we're getting declining results or we're concerned that we've plateaued? How do we look differently at things? Some basic thoughts from us. Cyance as an organisation work with lots and lots of business-to-business brands around Europe and in North America. And one of our very simple starting points is a discovery phase. And this is step one of the 7 steps that we take as an approach with any business we work with. It isn't rocket science, and no pun intended, but it is designed to step back from the whole situation and say, well, okay, first and foremost, and this perhaps is the biggest sin I've seen in marketing, and I've been guilty of it as much as anybody else, is not setting objectives before we go off with our marketing campaign that we launch or we brief out to whoever does our marketing. It's really being sure about what our objectives are, and also aligning those objectives to what the business wants. just saying we want to get X number of followers or to increase our database by Y size isn't quite as compelling as telling the finance director you've just made 200% to the bottom line, or the gross profit on something is exceptional. We need and have an obligation to talk the language of the business, not just the language of marketing. So what are our top line objectives? What's the strategic approach we'll take for that? So what's the current market approach? We can assume most of us are trading already, so we have a way of doing things. And at this point, it's certainly not a case of saying, right, let's throw everything out. That risks throwing baby out with the bathwater. Let's look back and say, what is it that we feel is working? Can we prove that empirically by some kind of measures? Or actually, is our good old friend gut feeling still important to us? And I think that's something that marketers don't use enough of. If it seems like a good thing to do, and dare I say it, marketing to me is just advanced common sense, then don't be afraid to keep going with it until you can prove it statistically. What's the offering? How saturated a space are you in? Customers, and this is the interesting one that often gets missed. Who are the customers that we're targeting? And what's the difference between the customers we're targeting and the customers we actually have? Is there a difference? We do an awful lot of data work, and data is something, my background is digital marketing and always has been, but I've become a late to the party lover of data for the understanding it gives you of where your organisation is. Anybody in this room will have some kind of shape of customer data, not necessarily paying customers, it doesn't have to be that, but they will give you real insight into what the shape and makeup of that organisation or organisations are. So if I was to poll hands, which I won't do, how many of you could confidently sit here and say you know all of the industries that your customers are in? The strongest, the weakest, what their size of company is, geography, turnover, anything else that may be compelling to help you to try and target in and say how many other of those organisations are there out there in whatever market you work in. Let's assume it's the UK, and we have with lots of data companies, many of them that are in this big room here, we'll talk to you about how you can try and sample in and find organisations that essentially look like ones you already have a good trading history with. You have ready-made testimonials and case studies, which we'll come back to later. Behaviour. How do they buy from you? I'm making an assumption, because it's how most of the organisations we work with in business-to-business work, that salespeople are really key to the buying process because of the fact that it's a complex, expensive product. Some of you may work with lower value or lower price ticket, B2B goods. They may sell well off a page, off a phone number, off a website. But understanding what is it that's going to be needed in terms of the buying decision, and also, importantly, who in that organisation is going to make the decision. It may be a marketing resource platform. Again, many organisations in this room will try and sell you one, but as marketeers, it's not just us that makes that decision. It may be the finance director that needs to be considered. Doubtless, the IT director needs to be considered, and other senior bodies that are decision makers and stakeholders that will have a really different view of what that product or service is, and therefore the information or the marketing collateral you need to put in front of them will be very different. Another point I'll come back to. Mentioned data already. Operationally as well, what challenges do we have? Show of hands. Anybody have a problem between sales and marketing alignment? That the marketing leads and work we do, salespeople just don't appreciate us enough? Come on, be honest. Good. Okay, just 3 of you. The rest of you, well done. Yeah, it's a challenge, and often born out of the fact that there's a disconnect between what we do in marketing and what salespeople need. My view, very simply, in marketing is I've become quite subservient over the years. If we can serve marketing what they need, it makes for an easier life and often makes for a more successful life for that business. So don't be afraid to acquiesce to them in terms of what they need, because they'll simply see more value from you. But it's a question that has to be asked up front. And that links into the last point in terms of success. What is success? Is 300 followers on your LinkedIn corporate page success? Or is it about that you want to try and shift X number of units, or you want to increase your customer base by Y percentage over whatever period? Again, as I said, not necessarily rocket science, but important pillars to start with. That's one of the 7 steps. I haven't got time for all of them today, but we have got a presentation if you want that later. By the way, if you're taking notes, if anybody wants these slides afterwards, I'm pretty sure the organisers will put them up. But if you happen to be so inclined, my Twitter handle is at the bottom there, tweet me, or my colleague Emma, who's at the back of the room at the end of the session, just give her a business card. I'll happily give you these slides and a couple of other things we reference if they're useful, so that you don't burn your fingers and pencils out on day one. So we talked about the type of message that we need to get. The timing's vitally important as well. And one of the challenges that we see often is this case study syndrome. This idea that we put too much showy content in front of people too early in the buying or the sales process. For me, it's a bit like this. If you were to go speed dating, wouldn't you necessarily ask somebody to marry you after 3 minutes of meeting them? That's a little bit hopeful. The point being that Case studies are a really, really excellent way of getting a point across to somebody about your product or service and how it may well work with them because it's worked with other organisations like them. But it may miss the point that they don't even understand what it is you do before they read that case study. So case studies are often really, really important down the sales funnel. White papers are probably the most overused term in business to business as well. That's a lazy way of just going, not really sure what they want, sod it, let's put every word we can think of into a document and call it a white paper. Resist the urge to do that. They have great value, but they're not something somebody's going to consume very early in the sales process. They're not aware of you. They therefore aren't going to commit that amount of time into Steve's world of rubbish analogies. A way of looking at that's useful, this is from Marketo, one of the MRM platforms. We have a similar one which we'll come on to. But what it makes a point very well, I think, is on the left-hand side you've got the different types of content or engagement opportunities, and then it starts to think about where those map into the awareness, the consideration and the decision phase, as they name it. We refer to it as a funnel, and I'm sure you'll have your own name internally for it. But what you see, white papers don't come in immediately, and case studies as well. It's not just in the awareness phase that people are going to want that information. They want light bits of information. And online particularly, forums, LinkedIn groups, particularly in business to business, not really Facebook. Resist the urge to try and go into Facebook just because the rest of the world's in there. It's not necessarily a great business to business platform, frankly, for the fact that 1 billion people may have lots and lots of detail and data on who they are, but hands up, how many of us really want to go home and spend time thinking about work we're on Facebook? So resist the urge in most cases. Think about what's the opportunity in the platform. The way that we look at this at Cyance is a funnel. And again, I'm sure most of you are familiar on the right-hand side with the idea of moving people from suspect. Somebody has hit some of our content. Let's say it's on a website, for argument's sake. We know nothing about them. Are they a likely customer? Are they even within a role within that organisation that's going to be relevant to us? We could get very excited by HSBC, for example, coming onto our website, but they have some 17 to 20,000 employees. How do we know who that is and whether they're relevant to us? They might just be doing some kind of master's research, something along those lines. What often tips the point is from suspect to prospect, that they'll qualify them out, either by behaviour, so think about what it is that you put in front of them that they can consume, and certainly at that top end of the funnel, resist the other urge, which is to try and put data capture in too early. We put people off all of the time because we ask for too much information too soon. Don't be afraid to let that content free and let people consume it, read it, and share it as well. And if you think back to my earlier point about the different roles within an organisation, we have a CEO, an MD, we have IT, we have information, we might have finance. We have different distinct people. They'll take different distinct routes through this funnel to come out at the bottom, which is what we're aiming for. And apologies for the overuse of acronyms, but Marketing Qualified Lead, MQL, and BANT, which is the term that we often start with an organisation on, which is, do they have budget, do they have authority, do they have need, need, and do they have a timescale for that? That's the kind of stuff that a salesperson or a sales body often wants from a really hot qualified sales lead, not just a marketing expression of interest. So ultimately we push them out of the funnel to a sales ready lead. What we see also is it's not just linear. Human beings, annoying as we are, we're not just homogenous beasts that do exactly the same thing as the person next to us. So two individuals that may come from two lookalike organisations in exactly the same industry may take a very different amount of time and indeed a different path to get ultimately down to there. In essence, some of them maybe take days, maybe even hours to get to a point where they want to consume content that to us triggers some signal somewhere back in HQ that says, yep, they've shown enough interest that they're worthy of perhaps a sales conversation or perhaps a telemarketing conversation, something we find very valuable down at the end of the funnel. But somebody else might take months to do that. And the temptation is, again, to try and rush these people along. So what we want to do is try and recognise where somebody is from the content they consume, perhaps from the role they're in, and resist the urge to drop the heavyweight items like your case studies and white papers on them until you're sure they even understand the concept of the product and service and the industry you're in. It's dead easy, I'm sure. You all know your products and service inside out, but I can tell you most of your customers probably don't know your products inside out, and they buy from you because we all have so many other things on our mind, it's not necessarily front of mind. Now, trying to turn that into something practical, this is a content map for one of our clients. This is actually to sell, interestingly, there's one here, a laptop security. One of these things, a boring old bike lock for a laptop, so someone like me at the end of my presentation doesn't take this home as a souvenir, from a brand called Kensington. Now, the person or the department that historically buy this sort of stuff is IT. IT are normally tasked with the fact that if a laptop goes out into the business, it needs to be tethered because it's expensive, you don't want to lose it, and in this day and age of information and data, it's not just the cost of the laptop. But interestingly, the buying cycle or the process, that funnel we go through, the CEO is or CEO or senior management at the top of that buying cycle or process. The persona, those are the people that we need to engage with first. Because if you just talk to IT about this, it's a pretty boring item and they've got other things on their mind. Where you win hearts and minds with things like this is for somebody from senior management to understand not just the fact this is practical, but they either see the opportunity, and bear in mind that most people at a senior level in CEO or C-suite are charged with two things. One, growing the business, and two, trying to reduce the costs and risk of that business. Particularly if they're a publicly limited company, they have their shareholders to answer to. So understanding that they are not going to be interested in the technical spec of how great this is and what the brake strain on it is. They're interested in the fact that if you don't use solutions like this, you could end up like the board of Nationwide Building Society, who 2 years ago, one of their colleagues took home a laptop to work very diligently. He went out for lunch, was out of his house for 2 hours, was burgled while he was out of the house, and the laptop, his work laptop, was stolen. Now the laptop was nothing special, probably, I don't know, £700 item, but the data, the customer data that was held on it, was such that the Information Commissioner fined Nationwide £2 million for a breach of data. Okay? We've all heard stories about brands like those, Sony, LinkedIn, Twitter, many brands have been hacked for data. That individual, not his problem, but the CEO of that organisation is worried about the £2 million, but is even more concerned about the £50 million it wipes off their share value from things like that going public. So that's where we start to say, well, okay, from an information point of view, think about what they want to hear, and then on the right-hand side, what content and what channel is best, in our view, to try and get that information across. And interestingly, in very recent times, the last 6 months or so, letter, direct mail, and particularly handwritten, still works really, really well at that high level. So if you have in your organisation a chairman, a managing director, a CEO, somebody who has credibility at the level of the people you're targeting, a handwritten letter from one senior person to another has been a very useful way to start a conversation. And as we move down, you start to see that the channel changes, the messaging changes, and the type of person that we need to talk to, and ultimately head of IT comes in further down the line, are the individuals that we start to push content out that's more relevant to them. Look at that in a slightly different way. If you think about how aware they are of the proposition, in this case Kensington again, whether they understand the value versus the solution, do they just want the product or what the product can deliver, and then are they at the point where they're looking to buy? They're showing enough interest that they either want to pick up the phone to somebody or place an order online or however that transaction happens. This is content, laptop physical security, a scary but helpful guide to IT managers, very much aimed at IT people. Written by us, we produce a lot of content on behalf of Kensington, but also up here, data loss, why your reputation is on the line. That's not for an IT manager, that is designed for the CEOs, the CFOs, who will read that. It doesn't really talk about our products or services because they're not interested in that, but it talks about the concepts or the risks, in this case, around what happens and we know about from industry. So in shorthand, that's a way of pushing out stories such as Nationwide, from a negative or from a scaremongering point of view. But also there's a positive, the opportunity that a lot of your products and services, I'm sure, offer value, make money, save money for businesses. It's not about the technical spec, will it install with our network? Will it roll out to our multiple users? It's actually where will that change our business? If I'm charged with being the leader of my business, what will your products or service do for me to help from a point of view of managing to win hearts and minds and grow my own business too? Show of hands, is anyone doing any international marketing? Okay, a few people. I'll not dwell on this too much, but relevance in terms of, there's a great opportunity for us by nature of the internet that I'm sure you all do this on a regular basis. If you don't, please do. Go into your Google Analytics or whatever analytics package you use and look at where your visitors are coming from by country. And you'll surprise yourself often as to where you have traffic coming from various parts of the world. It might be there's a market for you just by nature of looking into that space. We work with a couple of other brands, Motorola Solutions. Motorola, no doubt, are on display here. They make things like this. They make walkie-talkies. If you've shopped anywhere in the UK, you will have, in a supermarket, you will have used their technology for barcode scanning and things like that. If you happen to live in a high demographic area where you have one of those mobile handheld scanners, when you go around the shops, Anyone seen any of those? Yep, some of you, if you don't, you live in the wrong area. Sorry about that. Those are Motorola technology as well. You'll see that logo at the top. And what we have, from an international point of view, we're charged with generating leads across EMEA, all the way through to Russia for Motorola. And this is not to do Motorola down. I used this content in America with them recently to make the point that this is a Europe shopping survey, potentially very relevant to retail. It was written in America. It was conducted by a research agency in America. And apart from the fact that it has Zs instead of Ss, or Zs as it may be over there, it is 41 pages long. Now, this was the piece of content, and this again is a classic example that you'll see if you work or have some HQ over in another part of the world, typically North America. Well, this massive amount of content will be dumped on your door and said, give that to everybody, it's amazing, they will love it and come running in their thousands. Of course, we don't have time. I can send you happily this document, but none of you are going to commit to 41 pages worth of reading. So one of the simple things, and we're always looking for quick wins, is to say, well, what can we do with that content? In this particular case, we took some of the salient points out of that 41-page document and just turned it into a simple top 10 document. This is 10 ways that mobile point of sale, so if you go into retail environments at Christmas, so if you go into Selfridges, for example, they have the ability now to pop up basically things like this where they can open tills wherever there's footfall and congestion. That's mobile point of sale. If you are the owner of Selfridges, not just Mr. Selfridge, whoever owns it now, then you will have a challenge with the fact that at certain periods it's so busy you cannot get enough people on the tills to get transactions through. That seems self-evident, but certainly we know with a brand like Motorola, people don't just buy technology for the sake of it. In fact, depressingly, most customers of Motorola really don't give a monkeys about the technology, the buttons and the bits it does on the different devices. It's what it will do. Will it save me money, or will it make me money, or will it do it both? Okay? And particularly that saving money. We all know how the retail environment is under such pressure at the moment. Every week goes by, another store disappears off our high street. A great tip, and some of you I'm sure are well aware of this already, but top 10s, top 7s, top 8s, bite-sized content. People love to know what other people in their industries are doing. If you have, and I'm sure by nature of interviewing a product expert in your business, lots of content that you can get at without really thinking about it. It doesn't need to be written into pages and pages. Just turn it into something like that. Push it out there, whether you have an email list, directly push it, or put it out on the web so that socially, particularly via search, it's going to be found. You'll have your own routes to do things. Then that will leave people to start on that journey in terms of the funnel. Recycling again, another thought. Again, this is Motorola. Motorola are a huge brand. They have big budgets, but we kind of work on the premise that if we can do things cost effectively and dare I say cheaply, then why not? On that right-hand side, that's a guy called Mark Thompson who works at Motorola. He's a product expert. You all sure have product experts in your business, whatever their job title. He's not necessarily the most compelling man on the planet, but if you put him in front of a video camera and audio and give him PowerPoint for 15 minutes, he can make some really interesting points about the state of, in this case, again, mobile point of sale or something like RFID. A pretty technical subject. RFID is the technology that you've got in your Oyster cards, which is moving into retail. IT managers get that, but the head of retail experience really doesn't want to know about technology. They want to know, well, if you put these tags in clothing, which is starting to happen in some brands, and give them a handheld scanner, your staff can track, if this was our store environment, can track where the clothes are. One of the biggest problems with retail loss of sales is that clothes item in your size is not where it should be because somebody's moved it to another part of the store. And literally it will scan across and go, it's over there. And now that's the feature, the function of it. That's cool. Can bore you for days about the technology, but that's not going to interest the target audience in this case. But somebody like Mark, the point here is we can produce a piece of video content or a canned webinar almost. It can go out onto YouTube, it can go onto their site, it can go out to the different channels we've established from a multi-channel marketing point of view, not just let's hit everybody with an email to get them to look at this. And it gives us a long tail, this idea that if we produce this content, as long as Motorola are still selling the technologies mentioned in that presentation, then it's still relevant. Somebody could find it in weeks, months, even years' time. So think about the longer-term value of producing these short, sharp bits of content. They don't have to be Hollywood production values to get your message across. Particularly in this day and age of YouTube, grainier, more real is much better than that very polished, triple handshake business-to-business marketing thing that we saw earlier in the presentation. Just to blow your brains a little bit, from a slightly more sophisticated way of doing it, and apologies there's so much going on here, this is a fairly basic, actually, concept that we use with an organisation and a number of organisations on lead scoring. So if we've got people in that funnel, one of the questions was, well, how do we understand what's the most relevant content at what stage, and how do we therefore track when they've done enough by behavior or by action to be warranted with perhaps some kind of next step, whatever that next step is. And what we've got on here, and again, if you want the slides, you're very welcome to afterwards. This is just a start of a 10 to say, depending on how somebody comes into you, are you prospecting from a data point of view? Is it your own data? Are people coming in by finding you inbound from social or search? What's the first piece of content we're putting in front of them? And we might have a mixture of content, because there is no right answer with this. I can't say to you, right, this one piece of content will be the killer. It's a case of trying to let a few bits of content out and see what happens from a point of view of the engagement levels. Where are we driving them to? And when do we bring in some kind of data capture? So bear in mind, don't resist that urge to do it too soon. And excuse me, coming across the screen, essentially, when they've scored enough points, and here's some ideas of starting points for different pieces of content, then if they've done 25 points, whether that takes a day, a week, a month, then that will trigger, normally for our telemarketing team, for whichever language we're doing it in on behalf of that organisation, to try and qualify that person out to that BANT, that budget, authority, need and timescale. That's the 4 pillars as a starting piece that most sales organisations are interested in, and will definitely improve the relationship between marketing and sales if we deliver them more of that sort of piece. It doesn't have to be done automatically. We've been doing this for a number of years, and you can do it semi-manually to start with, depending on the technologies you've got out there. I'm certainly not an advocate of you all disappearing off around this room and releasing as many POs into TFM&A as you can to buy all the technology you can do this. My experience is that an awful lot of organisations that buy platforms that do this buy far too much technology too soon. Resist the urge to buy all these amazing bells and buttons and whistles until you do the basics right. Get the basics from step 1 to step 2, then invest the technology, because what often happens is whoever buys the technology spends too much money and then becomes exposed or at risk within the organisation because they're the one that spent all that money on the thing that nobody uses anymore, and you certainly don't want to be that person. Great salespeople out here, but just be aware of the fact you don't always need all the buttons that they're giving you. What do you really need to do to start the journey, and then how can you progress from there? Okay, that's some very quick thoughts from me. As I mentioned, we're an organisation that work with many, many business-to-business people. That's our credentials in a very basic form. As a takeaway, if you're interested, there's a number of bits of content. We produce a lot of content. One piece we've produced, which is focused around international, but actually has some salient points for UK, and certainly starts to talk about those 7 steps. There's a document there. It's a how-to guide. It's not a white paper. It's pretty light. If you want more white papers, you can find it on our website, but we won't insult you by trying to pursue you down that route. Either tweet me, drop me a business card if you've got one, or my colleague Emma will stand at the back of the room and drop a card off with her. And I think I've probably got time for 1 or 2 questions if I can grab the attention of the ladies at the back of the room. Cooey! Hi. Got 1 minute? Okay, great. So does anyone have any questions or comments? It's far too early in the morning for that. Don't worry. Okay, look, if you have got comments one-to-one, either tweet me or real person come and have a chat with me. Otherwise, thank you for your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.